television. I'm Salome Tigrai and I'm here with today's news. You may watch the news live on your television screens and on our social media platforms, YouTube and Facebook. And now the details. In a press briefing earlier today, member of Tigray Central Command Getachew Reda said that his government believes the African Union gave a blessing to the genocidal war on Tigray and that his government cannot accept the AU as a leading mediator in a possible peace talk. He did, however, say that there would be a role for the organization in the peace process.
Yes, in our letter dated 14th of June, we have President Debrecen has clearly expressed reservation on AU. This doesn't indicate our reversal of long-held position to find African solutions for African problems. We still believe in African solutions to African problems. But we can make a very legitimate distinction between Africans who have the legitimacy to deal with African problems and Africans who lack the legitimacy to deal with African problems. For us, the African Union Commission gave its blessing to Abiy's euphemistically characterized law enforcement operation, which was a genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray, with the support of a motley crew of enemies who had an axe to grind against the people of Tigray with the government of Tigray. And they have not retracted that position yet. And for an institution that has clearly given blanket support for a genocidal campaign to facilitate a process that is meant to end that conflict, that genocidal campaign, that would be the height of irresponsibility. That's what we said. But we still believe African Union can have a role. What I'm saying is African Union can have a leading role. So what role it would have, let those Africans responsible, more legitimate Africans who we believe can deal with this issue and can mediate this issue, can facilitate this process, decide in consultation with the AU itself. That's our reservation. So simply because African problems need to be resolved by Africans doesn't mean that the very people who were involved in the creation of the problem in the first place should be involved in resolving it.
Asked about the team of negotiators appointed by the Ethiopian government, Getachew said a serious commitment towards peace would be better demonstrated through the restoration of vital services and other serious measures that could go a long way in elevating the humanitarian catastrophe in the region.
There is some gullibility on the part of some corners in the international community to assume that the fact that the names of the potential negotiators of the Prosperity Party was listed did amount to seriousness on the part of the Abiy government to really sue for peace. But it was obvious even by the international community standards, some of the things which even themselves have been pushing for by way of confidence-building measures, such as the resumption of services and the unhindered and unfettered access to humanitarian aid without any encumbrance whatsoever. These are the kinds of things that have hardly shown sufficient progress. And simply because you have a list of people who currently serve in the government, actively serving the government, even the Prosperity Party didn't bother to submit the name of the team to its cabinet, at least, as part of some kind of window dressing there. It didn't submit its names to the parliament, whether it feels the need to, that's not my headache, but for some corners in the international community to assume that the very fact that they know the names of the people who would potentially participate in negotiations, the details of which have not yet been settled. Where are you going to go? Who's going to facilitate the process? These are issues. How about services, which cannot be subject matter of any negotiations? These have been the international community has been making a clarion call for the resumption of services as a gesture and as a confidence building measure to sort of to goad us into talks, proximity talks. These are the kinds of issues we still cry out for explanation, cry out for answers. So we don't believe the list of the people who was going to participate is of relevance at this point in time. Further, there are things that need to be taken care of first. More importantly, whether the kinds of things that should have been done in order to show that the parties are really serious about peace are in fact done. As far as we're concerned, we have done everything in our power to show our readiness for peace. We have withdrawn from areas we were asked to withdraw. We haven't sent a contingent to attack any enemy territory or anything. In fact, there has been some indications by especially Amhara expansionists to try and entice us into action. To a certain extent, we did take some limited action, but we did avoid full-scale confrontation in consultation mainly with military top brass of the prosperity government. So we have done everything as far as we're concerned. The ball is in their court to show us that they are indeed serious. Now they are standing in the way of unfettered humanitarian access by withholding fuel. It's not their fuel. It was a month ago that Abiy's government said it has given clearance for the USAID and WFP to import fuel at their own expense. It was only meant for cheap diplomatic consumption. The government responsible for standing in the way of progress.
The humanitarian truce declared in late March had many hopeful that assistance would be able to reach the millions in urgent need. But close to 4 months later, many are still struggling to access food and medical supplies as essentials for the distribution of aid, such as fuel, are in little supply. Atinkut Mazgabo, head of the Bureau of Agriculture and Rural Development, says that this has had a devastating impact on many, especially mothers and children who are suffering from severe forms of malnutrition due to lack of food aid and medical care. Haile Gabro has the details.
The humanitarian truce declared in late March had many hopeful that the millions in dire need of assistance would be able to receive it. But now, almost 4 months into the truce, the head for the Bureau of Agriculture and Rural Development says the assistance that has reached the region so far is far below what is expected to address the needs on the ground.
Round 6 of aid distribution was supposed to be completed in December. Speaking now, in July we haven't been able to complete round 3. For one round of aid distribution, we need about 1,070,000 quintals of food aid. So for 6 rounds, we need about 6,500,000 quintals.
The head for the Bureau says that what little improvement has been seen in terms of improved access to aid since the start of the humanitarian truce has been upset by the lack of fuel. That has meant that a significant portion of the aid that has reached the region is yet to be distributed.
Even when aid arrives, it's not able to reach those that need it. It's in warehouses here where people are suffering due to lack of food. And the reason that aid is not being distributed is due to lack of fuel. After much pressure being exerted to allow aid into Tigray, now there is no fuel to distribute it with, and this is being done purposefully. Media outlets have been reporting that some 2 million liters of fuel has been apportioned to Tigray, but it should be known that not a drop of that fuel has arrived here.
Atinkut emphasized that blockade has had a devastating impact on many, especially mothers and children, with close to 28% of children under 5 suffering from malnutrition and 70% of pregnant women and lactating mothers malnourished.
More than 69% of pregnant and lactating mothers are suffering from malnutrition, with global acute malnutrition rates in Tigray for children under age of 5 at 27.6%. This is a very high number. While more than 3.4% are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. This is just our latest report. We have had previous reports that indicate that as much as 7% are severely malnourished. And when we look at the overall number, we estimate that close to 1% of children under 5 have died due to conditions related to malnutrition.
The head for the bureau said that the international community needed to do more to ensure that there is a sufficient flow of aid and basic services are restored to avert the catastrophic humanitarian situation over the coming months.
According to reports by Tigray Media House, Tigrayan refugees sheltered in neighboring Sudan took the streets on Monday after they say the World Food Programme employees went house to house informing refugees that aid would be reduced by half starting from the following month. During the protests, refugees called on the international organizations, diaspora, and the government of Sudan and Tigray to speak on their behalf to ensure that aid is not reduced. Saron Zagai reports.
Tigrayan refugees in refugee camps in Sudan held protest on Monday after refugees say WFP employees informed them that assistance would be reduced by as much as half the amount starting from the following months. Signs during the protest called for the right of refugees to be respected. The refugees said that weather conditions had further deteriorated living conditions in the refugee camp, with shelters collapsing due to the rainy season.
WFP ከሚቀጥለው ወር ጀምሮ የሚሰጣቸው ምግብ ሁሉ በ50% ይቀነሳል ብሎ
Employees of the World Food Programme went door to door and told refugees that starting from next month, that aid would be reduced by half. Refugees used to get 15 kilograms of sorghum, 1 kilo of pea, half a kilo of salt, and 1 liter of food oil. Now this will be reduced by half.
The refugees said they're in desperate need of assistance and asked that the Sudanese government and the government of Tigray advocate to the world on their behalf.
We held this protest so the world can hear our voice, so the international community, the diaspora, and the governments of Sudan and Tigray know that we need their help.
A new wave of arbitrary detention of Tigrayans is being reported in the capital as the Ethiopian government continues to send mixed messages regarding the possibility of peace talks. The detainees that spoke with Tigray television directly say that they had been forcibly taken from their residence, their place of work, or even from the side of the road and beaten by Ethiopian security forces. Again, Saron Zagai reports.
Since even before the start of the conflict, arbitrary and mass detention had become a daily occurrence for Tigrayans living in various parts of Ethiopia. But in the days leading up to and following the start of the conflict, the Ethiopian government's campaign of mass arrest of Tigrayans would intensify. Another large-scale campaign of mass arrest would take place in November of 2021, following the declaration of state of emergency that was used primarily to arrest ethnic Tigrayans, put them in concentration camps, and later falsely accuse, beat, torture, and kill them. Even in the capital, where the eyes of the world lied, many Tigrayans were kidnapped from the road and put in unidentified detention sites. Reuters reported in June that it had been able to confirm the detention of more than 15,000 Tigrayans between November and February alone, and that 17 had died in custody. A formerly detained Tigrayans told international media outlets that they were abused in detention sites and that children were among those held in these gross detention centers.
The police might have mood swings that you might get kicked. There are a lot of ways you were kicked. I personally also was kicked one day for doing nothing. I did nothing. I was about to take a shower. Guys who were kicked a lot of times. They only need a reason to kick you.
Astonishing, to learn that there were kids with us there. I specifically remember this kid. He was in grade 7. He barely began high school, and he wasn't even born in Tigray. His father is a Tigrayan, and his mother is not even Tigrayan.
Now, new reports coming out of the capital are starting to once again indicate that the regime had started a campaign of arbitrary detention of Tigrayan residents of the city. Many are being forcefully taken from the road, from their place of residence and work, to detention centers across many parts of the country.
أنا أبو أديس أواز نبر تجراوي تماري بنا خسرتين أو حدا دابونا أتي دكنا أو حدا دابونا مساعته لك بعرف ميني باس مكينا مسيوم كابي مسيوم كيولكم مع سايزهم بملوهم በቃ እቶውን አፍታ መኪና እንዳወሩ በዱላ በበትሪ ልብናቸው እንቅጥ ታብለም ኩላና እንዳወሩ እቶው ይለም እቶምና እቲኦም ናብ ፖሊስ ጣብያ ወሲዶም ናብዚ 22 ኣካባቢ ዘሎ ጤና ጣብያ ዝበሃል ፖሊስ ጣብያ ወሲዶም ኣድራሻ ኩሉ ነገር ምምዝጋብ ጀሚሮም እዞም ካብ ሃገር ካብ ገጠር ዝመፁ ደቂ ኣዲስ ኣበባ ዘይኮኑ ገለገለ እንዳረኣዩ ወይ ከዓ ቤተሰብ ጠያቂ ዘይብሎም ገለ እንዳረኣዩ ኣትሪፎሞም ንሕና ቤተሰብ ዘለና ቤተሰብ መፅኡ ዝጠይቀና ሰባት ኣውፅኦም
The residents tell us that as they were leaving, the officers told them that they were going to take those that they had left behind to Awash Arba, an internment camp in the state of Afar, and said they may even display them as prisoners of war.
እዚኦም ከንታ ክገብሮም ዘሎ ንኣዋሽ ኣርባ እዮም ክለቆም ኢሎም ኣዋሽ ኣርባ ሪኢኾም ስእሊ ኣስኢሎም ምርኮኛታት ናይ TDF ኢሎም ከወስድዎም ከምኡ ገበርዶ
Another Tigrayan resident tells us he'd been detained several times before. The first time, he tells us, he was detained in Awash Sabat, another internment camp in the Afar state, and was even displayed as a prisoner of war on state media.
زوزنيا نعمر كونيا تايلنا أم أواش نور نخزانا أواش نيري أواش سبات نيري أقول نور نسبات عمر كونيا تايليو كادسانات حفظنا كزوزنيا أنا خذ كاي ولتي توصل نيري.
The Tigrayans say that they're living in constant fear and that they are unable to go anywhere, including markets, banks, and their place of work.
يلولو طاعت بزحت ساعات فقدوا منهم كفينا نوعد لنا ويلمو بنا يسوي حاجز نقروا فتوت لقوننا يا وجلو دياسبورا تتجارو حواتنا توصل ناش هاي لأخذنا يا زوزني وكنا جن تخويناون زوزني وكنا جن تخويناون نعلنا أكاونت ترى أخذنا قصري بنسأل نتكلم سوي يبى بنسأل نتكلم خالنا يعني أنا خزي قات إمنا لا تقاي خامنا ريزوزني ومرات حزنا لنا.
The rounding up and detention of Tigrayans has been confirmed by multiple international organizations and media outlets over the past 2 years, and despite this indicating a clear violation of international human rights law and principles, the international community has remained on the sidelines, reporting but failing to take any concrete action that could deter the Ethiopian government from continuing its campaign of discrimination and abuse.
Global Society of Tigrayan Scholars and Professionals sent an open letter to the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Sunday, saying it was alarmed by statements made during the 50th session of the UN Human Rights Council, in which the leading expert said that the Commission would take up the findings of the joint investigation by the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights and state-appointed Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, saying the state-appointed body lacked credibility to conduct a non-partisan investigation into atrocities in Tigray. The Society stressed on the need to include all stakeholders and follow a survivor-centered approach for investigations to be credible moving forward. Abel Zagab has the details.
Global Society of Tigray Scholars and Professionals sent an open letter to the International Commission of Human Rights Experts in Ethiopia, setting alarm on the decision of the Commission to take up the findings of the joint investigation by United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and state-appointed Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as well as that of the Ethiopian government's Interministerial Task Force on Accountability and Redress of Violations. The Society said the joint report was compromised from its onset by the decision to allow Ethiopia Human Rights Commission a partisan and government-affiliated body, while it excluded the government of Tigray, allowing the government of Ethiopia to dictate the investigation process via its own establishment. The Society also discussed the findings of the Interministerial Task Force led by the Ministry of Justice, which the Society said had been weaponized against the people of Tigray, emphasizing that the Ethiopian government had no credible democratic institutions to investigate crimes, stating that the ministry has given legal cover for atrocities committed in Tigray by Ethiopian forces, and said that the Tigrayan people no longer had confidence that these institutions would carry out a partisan investigation into atrocities in Tigray. The correspondence highlighted on the need to ensure the scope of investigation within Tigray meets the gravity of the violation committed, conducting on-site investigations in places such as Togoga, Aksum, Debra Abbay, Mahabradego, and other hotspots where horrific massacres took place. The correspondence finalized, stressing on the need to include all stakeholders as originally stipulated in the terms of reference of the Commission, explaining that excluding Tigray and local authorities would put the credibility of the investigation into question and exacerbate the polarization and politicization of human rights and humanitarian responsibility in Ethiopia and beyond.
Tigrayans from across the country have been the victims of horrific violence that has forced them to leave the place they had called home for decades. Our reporter Mintakidana met Mbai Hasha, who had left Tigray as a child and had been living in the neighboring Afar state for decades. Mbai says she was a successful businesswoman in Afar and had built a home and a happy life there until July of last year, when she says Ethiopian forces raided, killed, and looted in their village, forcing her and many of her family members to leave the area. Today, Mbaye is sheltered in an IDP camp in Maqala, where there is little food, medication, or sufficient supplies to help her and her daughter get by during this rainy season. Let's take a look at the report.
IDPs displaced from Afar are seeking refuge in this IDP camp in the districts of Quiha and Maqala. Many left their home of many decades after Ethiopian forces and their regional allies committed gross human rights violations targeting villages predominantly populated by ethnic Tigrayans. Mbaye Hishe is a single mother to 4 children. She raised her children on her own after her husband passed away some 20 years ago. She was a successful businesswoman. Although she was born in Tigray, Mbaye was raised and lived all her life in Shikhat in the Afar state until the night of July of 2021 when Ethiopian forces raided, looted and killed many in the predominantly Tigrayan village where she and her family lived.
They took all our belongings and animals. They even cut down and took plants in our farms. It's hard to talk about what happened in Shikhat.
Before she was displaced, Mbaye says she had a successful business in Shikhat and says she was proud that she was able to raise her children by herself after the passing of her late husband.
My life was good. I was a businesswoman. I used to sell sugar, grain, and butter. I raised all 4 of my children by myself.
Mbaye says that the day she left, she had thought that things would settle down again and that she would be able to return. But now, a year later, she fears she may never see her home again.
I left home on July 30 of 2021. I left my home with some money for transportation. I thought I'd get the chance to return soon. I went to my daughter's house in Maqala and stayed there till we ran out of food. Then I went to the bus station. My plan was to go back to Shikhat, sell everything I had and come back to my daughter. But they told me that roads were blocked and there's no way I can go back to my home. I had no choice but to start to beg. I used to beg in the city, the countryside, and really anywhere. I thought there could be food. Then I heard that people from Shikhat were being sheltered here, and that's when me and my daughter came here.
But Mbaye says that living condition at the temporary IDP camp is not much better. She says IDPs there have almost no access to food, clean drinking water, or medication.
It's been almost 6 months since I started to live here, and we've only received 15 kilograms of wheat. That's all. We don't have any clothes or even something to sleep on. We're always hungry. There's no water to drink and we don't have access to medical treatment. About 3 years ago, my vision on my left eye started to decline. I don't have money to get it checked. And even if I had the money, there's no medication here because of the siege.
And the rainy season, according to Mbaye, has made situation at the camp even more difficult, exposing many to illnesses.
Water goes through the roof and windows. We're so cold since the winter started. We sleep on the floor. There are no blankets, electricity, or coal to keep us warm.
Mbaye says it's up to the world to ensure that the Ethiopian government lifts the siege on Tigray, so that the many like her living in IDP camps across the state can have access to food, medication, and vital services.
The world should put pressure on Abiy's government to ensure that aid is able to reach Tigray without any restriction.
The Ethiopian government declared a humanitarian truce in Tigray in late March, and while the world has endlessly praised the Prime Minister and his administration, IDPs like Mbaye yet to see any benefits from the truce, as they continue to struggle to access basics like food and medication.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. See you next time.